Good afternoon. Welcome to the PRG Hybrid Studio at the Saatchi Gallery. Before last March, we used to run Hear Yourself Think as informal coffee mornings in our Covent Garden boardroom. 25 people all squashed into a small room talking about things that interested themselves. We dealt with topics as diverse as AI use in fashion, event aroma design, and the philosophy of creativity. We also had conversations on more traditional subjects like lighting design, production skills, and how to create great content. We've been debating when it was right to start relaunching these talks, and now with the green shoots of hybrid and longer-term events coming back to life in the thankfully foreseeable future, this is the perfect time to restart these talks live from the Saatchi. On that note, I'd like to introduce our distanced panel for today. They will be doing most of the talking, I hope. I'm going to start with Frankie Boyle. She's a light artist, director, and designer. Frankie is fascinated with light. How we connect with light has become her main drive and passion. Harnessing the essence of that response is the focus of her work. She explores biological evidence about how light affects us and how this combines with evolving technical discoveries and multi-sensory elements that strengthen and deepen our artistic response. Frankie has created activations which have had impact around the world, hosts her own YouTube channel on the psychological effects of light, and has recently been a speaker at various Google events. Chris Doggart is Managing Director of Beings. Chris has 25 years of senior level experience in event delivery. He joins us from Beings, a business specializing in production, services support, including digital broadcast, virtual production, and web development. The last few years have been an exciting time of significant growth for the company. In line with their motto, Better Together, Beings are creating a human-centric culture, which makes them the production partner of choice for clients and staff. Prior to joining Beings, Chris spent 12 years on the senior leadership team at George B. Johnson, working on brand pavilions at the Olympics, multiple award-winning mega conferences, and large open-air concerts in Trafalgar Square. Robert Dunsmore, he's a creative director and a content whiz. Robert is a leading freelance creative director, a storytelling strategist delivering experiences defined and shaped by culture first. He creates ideas that duet, live and live online, product and purpose, behavior and belonging, adding one new thing to every event, the one thing the audience will remember. Robert says that as live returns, on-demand formats will have to deliver extreme accessibility, extreme sustainability, and extreme likability. Not everything in events will change, but everything about our attitudes and the way we deliver our events, meetings, and experiences will have to change. We also have with us Harriet Stewart, who leads our Dubai office for updates from that region and her thoughts on the topics to hand. Hello, Harriet. Nice to see you.
Hello there.
Harriet is our sales director for Dubai and the Middle East, is firmly linked with all the regional markets as they spin back up to delivery. She has 12 years experiencing, delivering and constructing the highest level corporate and governmental events around the globe. Her knowledge of the expanding Saudi marketplace is in depth. Harriet will chat to us about develops in the Middle East and how this region is doing. Thanks for joining us today, Harriet. Our topics today will be wide-ranging, from machine learning, MX, and how that impacts customer experience, CX, virtual fatigue, the roadmap, of course, designing with and for new technologies, all underneath the umbrella of how to purpose and what is the purpose of events. Small sidebar, please do use the Q&A embedded into the platform. These questions will come up on screens here, and we'd love to get to those questions with our panel. To kick us off, I'd like to bring a question in which has direct relevance to the roadmap and also to how we can use those technologies we've all developed to such an extent over the last year. It's to do with virtual fatigue and how that roadmap works. I'll start with Frankie. You mentioned a really interesting piece of research you came across, which was related to how we absorb knowledge. Perhaps you can talk us through that and start our conversation on the virtual world and the comparison to live experience.
Sure. Virtual fatigue, like we've all been inundated with screens, haven't we? From our telephones to our laptops to everything that we see. You're actually watching this on a screen. We've got a screen behind us. There's so much screens that is happening. And we actually, when we look at screens, we blink half as much. And so therefore we are and then blinking is a way of memorizing information. So therefore the more that we blink, the more that we take on board. But when we stare at screens, we half the amount blink. Also, the amount of blue light that's coming from screens, like the saturation that we're getting hitting the back of our eye, this amount of blue light that we're getting is so much more intense than the sun could ever give us. Like the sun has this natural sky blue box mentality. Blue box mentality. That's exciting, isn't it? God, that sky has a blue box mentality. It's coming down straight into our eyes and hitting that cortisol that gets us through the day. The thing is, with the screens, it's hitting the amount of blue light that we're having intaken into our bodies late into the evening is then not allowing us to sleep properly. So we're having a bit of a sleep disorder crisis because we are not taking on board all the amount of health benefits and understanding how to do the lighting within our homes and understanding how much to look into screens. So yeah, it's a lot to do with circadian rhythm and how we need to understand how our bodies work with the sun and how we must start to switch off and how we must decrease the amount of blue light from our laptops and screens as we go into the evening.
Okay, that's very interesting. And how does that impact, you think, how we'd structure between a live event and a hybrid one? Perhaps I could turn to you, Chris, on this, as looking at how we build together the content for a live event and the content for a virtual, and do we need to take that in hand and in knowledge as to how we impart the content?
Absolutely, but I think screens get a bad rap. And I'm not entirely sure, Frankie, whether I concur. I mean, yes, obviously the science, I'm sure, doesn't lie in terms of the blinking and the blue box mentality of the sun.
Blue box mentality.
But I think it's very difficult. People blame the medium a lot for the reaction of the audience. I'm not sure whether people blamed books for the impact that overreading had. I think people just said it was a bad book. And I think, when people watched a television program, it was a bad television program. But now we have a virtual event and people blame the medium or the tool which the content is delivered by. And if I spend 2 seconds watching my daughter's obsession with small screens and TikTok and anything that flickers blue, green, yellow and red, I see no fatigue from them. So there's something that's keeping them engaged for hours and hours and hours of their own choice. So I think we need to look at ourselves and really question whether the content itself is doing the job of really engaging with the audience. Yes, I think staring at a screen all day can be exhausting, but I think there is a mistake to blame too much of the impact on the audience on the tool itself.
Okay. Does that then change how you grade an event depending on your audience? So if you have an audience which is made up of Gen Z, I believe, is it now? Generation Z, who will be my daughters, a 11 and a 19-year-old. Their appetite and their ability to stare at a screen and still retain knowledge is much greater than mine. I'll switch off after a couple of hours without a shadow of a doubt. But do you then grade how do you create an event which is cross-generational so that you have content which can work and not create that virtual fatigue so people switch off and still retain the messaging? If I turn to Robert for that, about how you'd create that content side.
Every event is actually owned by the audience. And the audience they're the energy, and in the in-person events and live events that we've been used to and in live interactions, there's an energy that comes from that. And the brain runs on glucose. And so that energy is quite infectious and it works, and that reciprocity builds that energy up. Obviously, when you're using a screen device, then it's, like Frankie says, it's a void and you're giving so much of this energy to the void. But if the content, as Chris pointed out, is bingeable, if it's binge-worthy, if you're engaged by it, if it's actually stimulating you, then it's going to work for you. And so you can quite happily sit through a whole night of a box set at Netflix, or you'll quite happily sit through TikTok left, right and centre, or you can sit through an event which could change your perspective or change the way you feel about something. So you have to design for the audience. Everything at the end of the day is about the audience, and particularly with an online event, then they are the curator and the editor. One swipe and they're gone. So you must keep them engaged all the time, and it also means that when you're creating your content, you look at the transitions of that content so that you don't lose them, and you give them something which is relevant to them all the time, and then you landscape it and break it down into little snackable bites. Snackable bites are a wonderful way to deliver things that are online, and that will make it perfectly healthy. But I totally agree with what you said about the light. What's the difference between blue light and sunlight?
So the sunlight will give a the color spectrum, the CRI from the sun is 100, so therefore is an equal amount of all colors, whereas an LED screen will give a far higher amount of blue light. And our bodies run on light. That's 4 billion years of evolution embedded into our DNA. Like, our bodies know when to wake up. The hit of blue light from the sun starts cortisol, and then we have cortisol through the day, and then as the sun deteriorates throughout the sky, and then kicks into the red tones, then releases melatonin. Now, melatonin will not kick in if we are looking at screens. So therefore, the reason, as you're looking at this blue light, and especially when the lights go dark within a room, you're looking at a screen, your pupils are nice and wide, looking in the dark, trying to take on board what's happening, and then you look into the screen, so your pupils are as wide and dilated as they possibly are. You look into a screen and you're getting so much more of a kick of blue light than our bodies were ever evolved to have. So therefore, we're having this kick of cortisol just before we go to sleep, hence why when we turn off the light, we're buzzing. It's like we've just had a coffee just before we've gone into bed. So.
Sometimes that's a good thing. So if you're looking at how you design an event, you've got two aspects to always take on part there. You've got to take on part the audience and the consumer's judgment of what they'll take away. But you've also got to take on how you then push through that messaging, especially as we move towards hybrid events, which are part virtual and part live. How do you make sure that your live audience, whether they're in a small darkened room or in an open space, are going to be able to receive the same information in the same way, or do we start to break down the information differently for a virtual audience against live, even if they're attending nominally the same event? Do you think that's something to take on board? I'll go to Chris for you for this, if I can. How you actually set out the agenda of the messaging of an event to reach the same conclusion, even if you have half live and half virtual?
I think it's a fascinating adventure we're about to go on, because I think, it's interesting that you use the word event. It's an event, and it always has been an event in the past, and the events have now gone online. But are they really events? I'm not sure that they are. I think they're broadcasts, and I think, where we need to look to at the moment with online is we compare ourselves to broadcast media, to television, to film, and that's how the content needs to be structured, because that's the format in which people are engaging with it, and that's how they're consuming that information. And I think as we move back into the real world and the live, it's going to be interesting to see how people adjust, because I think we've moved to the small consumable bite-sized chunks of information. We've understood that in television you can't expect somebody to sit down and watch for 8 hours, whereas when you take them to a live event, if it's a conference, you could quite easily schedule an agenda for a day that's 8 hours long, and sometimes people will sit. A few of the events I've been involved in, people will sit in the same chair for all of those 8 hours, listening to one presenter present, and that's a sort of staggering sort of capacity for content and for engaging with the information. The virtual world is completely different. People won't consume the information like that. And I think it would be interesting to see what lessons we've learned from this virtual world and we take back into the world of a sort of hybrid solution. I think, we've had some fantastic news recently, only yesterday here, for a roadmap to getting out of lockdown. And I think, there's a lot of answers now about what we're going to be able to do here within the UK. Events is a global business and an international business that involves a lot of travel. I think that's the big question that is yet to be answered. So I think that the hybrid is going to involve multi-location events happening simultaneously, where you've got hubs of activity. People may feel confident to gather locally within their own country, but they won't travel internationally. So I think that's going to be the challenge, is how do you create a cohesive story and engage an audience when they're in different countries, different time zones, different regions, and consuming in different methods on a screen and in the room. I think what we're talking to a lot of clients about at the moment is starting with the digital. We find that there's a lot of blockages come when thinking about the live event, because you're planning for something that you just can't predict until you get the sort of predictable solutions. Planning for digital allows people to focus on the content and the story, because that will happen, and it sort of unblocks that planning process, and then you can flip from digital to live, I think, a lot more easily further down the line if things open up.
Yeah, very interesting. Perhaps on the topic of travel and how that impacts, especially now we have some dates in the UK for the 21st of June, hopefully, where we could all go back to what passes for normality. I'll bring Harriet into the discussion here now, if I could, to talk about how that travel world is impacting in Dubai, because Dubai obviously have had some events to take place. I know they shut down again and are looking to open up, but has that been something where those conversations have had from meetings organisers in the UAE?
Absolutely. I mean, travel and destination management companies are a key factor to the event economy in Dubai, and it is certainly the travel and incentive market, which is the one that we look to here. They're working closely with the likes of Dubai Tourism to really encourage people to come back into this territory. It's interesting because some of the takeaway comments that Chris and Robert have made, I'm nodding and agreeing, because I think from the virtual sense and also the live delivery, currently what's happening is there is a broadcast element which potentially is being compared almost to a Netflix style quality, which is not quite there yet. You know, from a delivery of a live event, you get that goosebump moment, you have that rush of energy as the CEO or the band comes onto stage. We're not quite capturing that into the virtual setting yet. And perhaps the coffee break moment or the networking moment at the bar and the headache perhaps the day later, that those experiences are not being felt either. So it's how to perhaps think about that in the future when we take perhaps more so into the hybrid setting. But to go back to the likes of the destination management side, they are certainly looking at Dubai, probably perhaps around Q4 next year. Again, they are looking at streamlining some of that, perhaps doing it in phases or waves of business groups coming back into town, and with the ability to have the hybrid live element and some of the smaller hubs. It's interesting because we see more and more our marketplace becoming global. The likes of yourself and I constantly talk about our global partners and the studios that we have worldwide. That's a kind of spin-off from what we're already seeing within the hybrid world.
Absolutely. If I could ask a specific question about Dubai, UAE. Obviously, we've had our dates of roadmap announced yesterday by Boris Johnson. Has there been anything quite so specific stated in the UAE yet, or in region?
Well, we went into, if I backtrack and talk about last year, we had a short lockdown, which was perhaps more severe than the UK did. And our numbers certainly reflected that in terms of the infection rate and the R rate. So that was a managed and a sustained process across even into this year. So whilst we're not having daily communication or from the likes of Sheikh Mohammed, it's certainly a market that's already open for business. So the level of communication or a roadmap isn't necessarily required right now in this current situation. What I would say, though, is we're a population of 9 million people. 5.5 million people have already received their first dose of the vaccine. So that's well over half of the population now that has been vaccinated. I myself have had my second shot only last week. So yes, we're doing quite well on the vaccine front. So again, is there a need for direct communication from the rulers? Perhaps not.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll throw back to one question which we were talking to earlier on, Rob, about the judgment that consumers then make and how a consumer judgment in our socially networked world could then impact on how we set up a business judgment about how we pass an event, how we set it up. Is that something you think is going to become stronger in the next period, especially as we come out of the next 4 or 5 months, where there may be some reticence to deliver events that are live? Do we think that social and consumer judgment is going to impact more on business and brands than it used to in the past?
The short answer is yes. There's no doubt about it that business to business has been, particularly with the events market, has a lot of business to business companies have sat on their hands. And business to consumer has moved on quite well, and they're still being quite aggressive, and they're still actually trying to do things, and they are engaging with their community. So the B2C market is leading the way in terms of experiences, because some of those are still being planned now. In terms of the consumer power that you referred to, or the audience power for events, it's huge, because all of the power, particularly with hybrid or with online, all of the power goes to the audience. If you can't keep them connected and engaged, they will not stay with you. From a point of view of consumers, we already know, and we have seen consumer activity, that if consumers block a brand rather than support a brand, the block is far more powerful than the support. So ultimately, we have to learn from that, because in the event and experience market, we're dealing with communities. And so the event owners and the brands and the corporates and the clients that we work with who have kept relevant to their audience, have shared and been open and transparent with them, they will have a benefit from that, because they are still relevant to our audience's lives. And the brands and the fairs and the events which have hidden away and are no longer relevant to their audience, they will lose them, in my humble opinion.
Very good. I'll throw to one of our audience questions now, if I can. Do you think we have the stamina to get back into full-on events?
I think often it comes back to for the purpose of the event. I think before we were just putting on an event and we just wanted to make it a showcase, and we just wanted it to be as bigger and better and just more is more, and just give everything. And now I think we're going to have to really understand what the purpose is. Like, why do I want to go to that event? Why does that customer want me? Am I going to be valued? Are they going to value me? Who are they? The purpose of the event for a corporate sector. Like, the corporate sector generally is to do with, as Harriet was saying, going to the bar, having a drink with someone. And so therefore, if that can't necessarily happen, then what are you wanting to get out of it and communicating? And then also, is it about selling, or is it? And so therefore, I think when we start segregating hybrid events, going online or being at the event, everybody's purpose, I think the online event will have a different purpose to the actual event. And I think we need to hone in on what that purpose of the event and who that client base is for them to harmonise and really feel connected. Because as we know, walking into an event, the smell of the event, the feel of the event, all of those stimulating the sensory cortex of the brain, you're going to memorize the event so much better than if you're just looking at something on the screen. It's not going to sink in, and you're not going to remember it.
Okay. I think what I'll do is I'll bearing in mind those last two questions about the consumer judgment, how that works, and then how events can become impactful. I think we'll move on to our second topic at this point, if we can, which we're going to talk about machine learning, and how machine learning then impacts into consumer judgment and consumer experience. I think the term is MX, machine experience against consumer experience. And that has huge impact about the consumer judgment and how consumer judgments can be wider experience, but also how they can be manipulated. And how can we work to that kind of cultural approval affecting a brand and delivery when it's data that they see? And there's an expansion of MX in general life, as well in specific areas, and the mapping of our audience and how the audience sees data, that's gathering pace, and it's gathered pace a lot in the last year, and I think that's not going to go away. It's starting to affect artistic interpretation as well. One example would be in the Design Museum over the summer. They're showing an exhibition called Ada, where there's a almost semi-sentient robot named after Ada Lovelace, a 19th century mathematician. That robot will be in the Design Museum, and the robot will be drawing selfies of themselves and of other people through her own perception, through her own cameras, which are stereoscopic cameras that are interpreted inside the robot's brain, and then it will come out and draw a picture of somebody. And that's kind of, I mean, when we talk about an event purpose, Rob, I mean, how would a machine learning impact how we purpose an event like that? It's got many impacts, but I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts about how that's going to impact through designing machine art as how we experience that in an event. Does that change how we see it?
Well, to go one step back, I don't think any kind of AI or machine learning or MX or anything like, I don't think it will impact on the purpose. I think it will impact on the experience. So, whenever anyone brings technology to me, and I'm a simpleton, and so I think from the point of view of the audience, and if the audience is going to like it, then it's good. But it's either automation or it's innovation. And automation is going to make the experience quicker, lighter, less latency. Then there's benefits there. If it's going to make it more innovative, like the thing at the selfie robot, then that's innovation. It doesn't have to be perfect, but those are predated. I mean, there's a guy called Patrick Tresset, who's a Belgian artist who's been doing robotic drawings and selfies since around 2011. And I think he first had one they all called Paul. And he has these rooms of Pauls, which are little tiny school desks, with an old crappy IBM laptop, a digital camera, and it's got one arm, and you put a big biro in the arm, and then you sit in front of it, and it might see the switch behind you, or it might see you, and it does these fantastic drawings, and once it's taken all the data in, it goes incredibly quickly. Now, when you do that in front of people, then people start to attribute that machine to have some sentient sense, or they think that it has made a piece of art. It's not. It's just facial mapping, vision mapping. It's a process that's been done. It's been done by various algorithms, and it happens to have an outlet, which is a big biro. But there is no actual art per se in that. It hasn't been interpreted. What he then did is he put a flaw in the algorithm so that there was a slight bend in the arm, and then it meant that every single drawing came out differently, and then the drawings were prized more. So it's a manipulation of art, but I wouldn't say it was art per se in the traditional sense. But the MX for me is more about the experience than the art.
Okay. Frankie, if I could go to one thing you just said before, which is like more is more. Do you think machine learning, the abilities of machine to crack loads of data more than a human mind could process at once, is going to affect how we design events then? I mean, things like massive, I'm sure Harriet's probably seen these in Dubai, great drone swarms that create pictures in the sky, certainly from a single point of view at the moment. But the ability to do that, a human wouldn't be able to manage 3,000 drones in 3D space at one time, but a powerful computer can. Yeah. Is that the kind of thing that's going to take on more and more as we look for large-scale events?
I think our audience are going to become, out of COVID, I think our audience are going to be more savvy. I think our audience are going to be a bit more savvy to sustainability, why they're going, how many people are there, who they're trying to connect to. I think if you have, MX, you can have this amazing thing that happens, and so therefore, I'm a big believer in, if you're going 100 miles an hour, 110 doesn't feel any different, but yet 0 to 5, massive. And so therefore, I feel like you grab people's attention by the smaller amounts and the more powerful impact that you're going to have. If you just give them everything, they've become quite numb, and we were very numb just before we went into COVID. We know every event that we went to, it was just so much stuff that you actually become completely numb to your senses. You weren't connecting, you weren't sure about what you were working on, what you were drinking, or what you were feeling, or what the screens were doing. Because actually, if you asked anyone, everyone was a bit like, oh, I don't know, maybe it was this or this. But actually, if you did more care and attention to a certain thing and made that really engaging, the best, the stories, the best stories that are told, if you make your customer the hero of your story rather than your own brand and your own experience, make them the hero, they're going to connect to your experience and your brand far better than if you are producing or displaying the fact that you're the hero, as it were.
Okay, I think that's interesting. I'll come back to you, Rob, on that, because that leads us very firmly towards what we've spoken about previously about the purpose, the soul of an event, so to speak, as how do you create that one thing in an event, which is what people take away, that they remember a week later or a month later as part of what they feel, because it's an emotional resonance rather than something that's a specific line or a specific
residence from now on.
emotional resonance. Yeah.
Yeah, the purpose of any experience, which Frankie's just described an experience and how an experience functions, and the purpose of that experience is why it exists. So, you know, we're not talking about a specific event, so it's difficult to we're talking more around in philosophical terms, but an event will often have a product or will often have an objective, but the purpose is what reaches behind the audience's back, and it's something that they can join in with. So if you've got a brand or an event owner or a gallery like the lovely Saatchi Gallery you've got here, if it can appeal to its audience and it can articulate what that appeal is, and the audience can join in with that appeal, then that makes it resonant. It resonates with them so much more, and they take that moment away because they actually own that moment. You know, I was asked last Friday, I think it was, someone said virtual book launch and they're so boring and there's nothing we can do about that. And I thought about it for about 20 seconds, and then I said, well, why don't we take the book? You know, a book is the original data container, and the book isn't complete until a human being opens it and reads it. In the same way, going to an event or an experience is completed by the human interaction and the energy that creates. So why don't we take the book? Why don't we rip the book up? Why don't we take every page out? Why don't we send everyone who's coming to the book launch a piece of the book? And then everyone at the book launch will get to read out a paragraph or somewhere like that. They will all have a connection to that object, to that book. They will all be part of that book launch, and they'll never forget that moment because they will own it. So it's just we've got to take everything apart and turn it into an experience. Then it will connect with people and it will engage.
Yeah, make them feel like they've had a part within that event, like valued. If without me, that piece of book wouldn't have been read. Like,
which goes back to Chris's TikTok and so forth, in that if it's user-generated, then you own part of it. If you own part of it, you're invested in it. If you're invested in it, it's binge-worthy and you engage.
Mm. Do you think that machine learning, MX, is going to be ever, well, maybe not in our lifetimes, but going to be able to generate that kind of understanding, to generate the meaning?
I think no, it doesn't generate the meaning. It helps the experience become better because it pimps us. It makes us better than we were before. So, it's all data. So if you keep going to the same event, or you keep visiting the same site, or you keep interacting with the same event or the same brand, then there's data that's created. When that data is created, then machine learning can learn your habits, how you're doing things, and they can offer you more of what you already want. More, and it's saving you time, and it's saving you latency. It's a quicker, lighter experience for you. So it's therefore a better experience. It can't help you with one-offs. So it can't tell me who to marry next because I've only been married once, and still am. And so there's not enough data to make a really educated decision about that. It can't direct me. So I think it's about the experience. Like, you know, for me, I keep coming back to the experience rather than a creative.
Okay. Also, it won't have irony or personality, and that's one of the things. You know, we can have as much MX as we like, but actually, the more you actually understand something and actually understand sort of that emotional object relationship to it, and irony and personality, MX. Yeah.
Most of the AI that's around at the moment is narrow AI. There's not much general yet. If lots and lots of narrow AI streams join together, there may be a bit more general, but at the moment, it's a purpose. It's really good at GPS, it's really good at travel, it's really good at telling you what to watch, it's really good at helping you shop. But it won't make decisions for you, and it's not a sentient thing.
Okay, very good, very good. I think we'll move on a little bit now, because that's moving down to the use of technology. And that's our next section, which is how to use those new technologies to their maximum, which is things that we've learned in the past year in particular, and things that how we can bring back previous technology, large live-scale event. Just a quick reminder to the audience, please do use the Q&A section. We've got some good questions here that we'll come back to, and it'd be great to see your questions as they come in to the panel. Virtual fatigue or not, it would be really good to hear from you. So we can't foresee the development of virtual, AR or XR as new technologies without allowing for some machine element, especially in the data handling. So one of our one of our big questions as we move forward is how do those new technologies marry to a requirement for sustainability, which is a really, really large question which affects how we plan all events now. Now, Chris, I'll come to you first, because we've spoken about how sometimes excess in events now can lead to almost repulsion from the audience and how that affects how brand may look at doing an event. And we can see brand efforts having explicit links to a social purpose. How do you see this playing out over the next couple of years with that blend and the new technology available, virtual and hybrid mix?
I think it's something that we've seen over the last 12 months in terms of the transformation and how we've delivered events. So at Bings, we have virtualized the entire production experience and taken everything from the production control room into the cloud, which has been fantastic in terms of allowing us to scale, allowing us to deal with the restrictions of the pandemic and travel, and allowing us to be able to produce shows for clients using very familiar methods, but in a completely different way, using the power of the cloud. And I think what that reveals is that we can do an awful lot in a very new and different way that can address some of these challenges of sustainability. I think, it's the next big challenge once we come out of the pandemic as to how we meaningfully address sustainability. And I think technology is going to be the key for that. One of the things that we're doing a lot of at the moment is 3D LiDAR scanning, so that we can create digital twins of buildings and spaces, so that we can try and reduce some of the travel required in terms of all the planning that goes into events, so that people can experience places on the other side of the world without having to travel there. And that sort of technology is going to open up huge opportunities for us to really address, the carbon footprint of events. I think, one of the challenges we've got is really trying to provide the data for people to make meaningful evaluations when they're making decisions around events. I think, we've all seen the sort of the tokenism and the very easily achievable sort of nods to it. And people do their bit. But really, have we got the data at the moment to be able to make that value judgment of, I'm going to choose that option over that option because I know what the impact is going to be. And I think that's where we need to move to be able to really track and measure and have that data at people's fingertips so that they can make the right choices.
Would it be like a menu? So you can be like, you can have this type of choice, or this type of choice, and this sustainability impact?
Yes.
Is that like the route forward of being like, okay, so when we go to make events, then, these are like...
Yes, I think, one of the challenges we see is that it's tricky, it's complicated, there's not an easy solution, and we all strive for that easy solution. But I think, it shouldn't be a reason to not make an effort and not to try and make improvements. But I think, if we think about something like exercise and the concept of steps, steps is something that we all understand very, very easily, and it's something that has only recently come into the vernacular of how many steps people do. People are very aware of how many steps they do in a day. That has created in our minds a measure and a choice for what you do, how you behave to increase and improve your physical fitness. If we could have a similar measure for something around sustainability, I think that would be a really useful move towards people making those sorts of decisions. There's a lot of discussion we were having earlier about, what is the right decision. It's not always the obvious choice that is the most sustainable route. And until we can really measure and really have a meaningful discussion around each different activity, whether it's travel, whether it's food, whether it's energy that we use, all of those different elements that go into making an event, at the moment we don't have the data. So that's something that we're spending a lot of time focusing on at the moment, trying to get meaningful data that can allow people to make the right choices.
I mean, it's something where I've seen in various different postings over the past couple of weeks about things. There was one that stuck out to me. One email, apparently, is capable of generating 4 grams of carbon, depending on the size of the email, how many people receive it, how many laptops it goes to, etc. Which is not a lot, but how many emails are there in a day? That's a lot of carbon from just emails. And the same metrics you could see for a video call, but please keep watching, about how much carbon is generated by people on an hour-long Zoom call. You get a metric which is it suddenly starts to tot up to a substantial amount of energy use. And is that something we will then need to bring in and balance off against when you look at hybrid events? If you're doing a live event and you're doing a hybrid event, you're doing a virtual side to it, does that then balance off as make hybrid events potentially the least sustainable because you're doing both? You're developing all the back end and the communication and the broadcasting, as well as doing all the stuff you need to do on the live side. And is that something that we're going to have to balance off when we look at those events and go, that's something where you need to look at that sustainability index, a carbon index, for want of a better phrase?
Yeah, I suppose where you see your audience coming from and like the cost of the fuel that they've taken to get there, the trains, the aeroplanes, or however much, and then say, okay, our audience is, coming from another country, or are they surrounding us? Like, there's so much in that sort of mix.
There is, yes, definitely. I'm going to come to you, Harriet, for this one, as you're over in Dubai in the Middle East, and because it's interesting to see how that sustainability element questions and frames in the context in the Middle East, because obviously we have one outlook here in EMEA, there'll be an outlook in the States, and there'll be an outlook for the Middle East. And how does that apply over there? Is it as strong an element in how you design an event?
Well, actually, it's not just an event, but if you look at Saudi at the moment, which is a really interesting opportunity as an emerging market, as well as everything else, Saudi is looking at taking that individual concept and really looking to put it into place from a city perspective. So at the moment, they have, in line with their Vision 2030, they have triggered 3 giga projects, one called Qadir, another called Red Sea, and a third called Neom. And only a month ago, they actually launched something called The Line, which is 170 kilometers of linear development, which includes a hyper-connected, AI-enabled future community, which will all be powered from 100% clean energy. So take the event conversation aside and really look at, from a city perspective, from a country perspective, they are looking and taking it very seriously in order to, whilst they're building the new cities, why not put that into place straight away? That this city will be built around nature, free of cars, streets will be in direct response to some of the most pressing challenges facing from a sustainability perspective. That then gives us legacy infrastructure and removes the traffic congestion. That's something that's really interesting, not just from a sustainability perspective, but also how many jobs that then triggers. That one development alone is something in the region of 380,000 jobs that will be created just for that 1 giga project. Again, one of 3 giga projects. So I would say not only are they taking it seriously, they're looking at it from a GDP level, they're looking at it from a sustainability approach, and it will trickle down into other areas. From a local perspective, in UAE, we've been hosting an event called the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week for, goodness me, about 10 years now. So their focus, certainly with Masdar and Irina, has certainly been to reduce the carbon footprint of the UAE. So yes, I would say that their fingers are definitely on the pulse from a countrywide perspective.
Great, that's good to hear. Chris, I'll come to you in relation to a story which we spoke about last week, which is talking about technology on an event and working for a technology company. We like to see big technology projects, but customers can read deliverables and the purpose of events from ways which we may not necessarily understand. And you were talking about one where a customer came in and graded an event almost on the quality of the carpet in the venue as they walked through. And that was quite an interesting way of when people look at an event and they go, yes, this has got a meaning to it because of what they see there, but it could be what they see, which isn't even necessarily something that normally sits in our perspective.
Yes, I mean, I think, that was, for me, was a fascinating insight when I overheard to these attendees at an event discussing the thickness of a carpet. It's the sort of thing that event organisers discuss, but don't always know whether or not the audience will be aware of it and will really have any awareness. But they do, and they did. And their perception was that because of the thickness of the carpet, therefore the company who were putting on the event were obviously doing very well. What a successful business they must have. Isn't this a good event because of the thickness of the carpet? And so they attributed qualities to the brand and to the product based purely on what they saw as the thickness of the carpet on the floor. I think that brings into all sorts of interesting questions, and particularly around the subject of sustainability, when a lot of events, particularly consumer or B2B events, are there for a commercial purpose. They're there in a competitive world with other organizations. They want to win that dollar, they want to win that contract, they want you to buy their product. And therefore there's an incentive to create that atmosphere for an audience. And I think trying to find that balance between setting the right tone that gives off the brand values, but that doesn't necessarily create that clash where you're actually creating a very unsustainable and something that is will potentially, as people become more aware of sustainability, create a negative impact for that brand, where there will be a sort of repulsion to the excesses and waste. That you could sort of make a parallel to how people may be repulsed from wearing fur. It used to be acceptable, it's now frowned upon. It could be that similar effect of people going, can you believe they did ... can reflect badly on a brand. So brands are going to have to walk a very fine line between trying to represent a positive story for their brand whilst equally not create a negative impact based on waste and unsustainability.
So, Frankie, if I come to you on that, you spoke about looking to win on an event. So sometimes a customer CX experience will get validation from the thought of they've won on an event. How does that get looked at when we look to build an event, to give a CX of that they've got one?
Sounds quite competitive of me, doesn't it?
Yes.
How do we win? I think, going back to your point, I think it's very much to do with understanding our connection, making sure we're not numbing someone out. I don't think they would have probably noticed the thickness of the carpet if there was like bright lights and champagne being, I was about to say thrown at them, but it depends on what type of event you're at. But
I want to go to your event.
yeah, I win at my event. I think it's allowing people to become immersed in one of their senses, moving. Like senses are still, when we almost when I talk about them, you can almost see clients' eyes sort of swell, like, sort of like the spiritual kind of realm. And I'm like, no, the senses is the thing that connects us to the memory of your event, is why you're there. And I think it's very much like getting, like you say, the one thing perfect of why they're there, the purpose of what you are wanting that client to be there for, or that audience member, and really engage them. As soon as they feel like they've had an input within that event, they feel like they've been valued, they feel like they've been seen at the event, and then they will connect far deeper to it, rather than just sort of feeling like they're just one in a million that is just sort of like coming in and out and around and through.
So it's almost like linking the content into the experience of the customer, for want of a better accent. And Harriet, you've been looking at this with one of our partners of a virtual crowd over in UAE, where that use of the audience experience is part of the whole genesis of those construction. Perhaps you could talk us through that a little bit.
Sure. I mean, Virtual Crowd is a really exciting partnership that we have with an agency called Fireplay, and it was born out of Nashville with our office over in Nashville. And we are essentially looking at something that enables the crowd to feel somewhat connected to either the band on stage. It was born out of the concert touring market, so it was certainly something that was more in the rock and roll industry that's already transcended across into the corporate world. So we recently did a project with Metallica where there was a virtual crowd that was on stage, again on an LED screen, just quite like your own in the Saatchi Gallery. and they were interacting between the band and the virtual crowd. And the virtual crowd moments, that creates a touch point at least of a memory that, okay, you're not stood next to a stranger or you're a group of friends at a festival, but you are engaging with your favorite person on stage. That creates a slightly different memory. It also allows you to, from a monetization perspective, perhaps look at a general admission package, upgrade to VIP and VVIP. So the platform itself is all about crowd management and an interface between. So when you look at it from a concert touring perspective, it then really quite easily goes across to the corporate world. So, a sales recognition event, they still need to host and communicate that annual event. At the moment, this is what we're seeing as quite a unique opportunity. Whether or not it stays for a period of time, let's say, but it's certainly something for a period of time whilst people are unable to travel or uneasy to travel. It's been working pretty well so far.
Yeah, and that goes to one of the questions which has come in as well, which is, will new technology help in person as well as virtual events? In a way, that's kind of a sync between both to bring the personal into the virtual, I guess. But we'll move on to our last topic of the phrase, content is always king. And I think what that topic has been, the lesson from that could be that whatever the technology involved or the machine learning, we can't escape from the fact that the content of how that event is structured is the king, and you have to get that right. You have to get the one section, the one soul right. You have to get the blend between virtual and hybrid correct. Rob, perhaps I could come to you. So we spoke about before about the purpose of an event. You can almost split it into two forms. There's a pragmatic commercial side, which is maybe more into play in a B2B structure, and an internal soul, which might be more when you lean towards the brand side. But is there a way you can bring those two together more between the blend of the virtual and physical, do you think?
Yeah, there always is. I mean, we've just had a perfect example. If you put all of the things that have just been said, so you've got the Uber personalization, which is that personal experience where you own a bit of it. And then Chris referred to steps, right? So that's a product, isn't it? A product, it might be a wristwatch or a device or whatever it may be, but it's actually an incentive, isn't it? Because you're talking, as soon as you do it in steps is the purpose, the watch or the device is the product. And by referring to it as a purpose, it's a simpler, more intuitive, more lovable way of looking at it. And it's actually incentivizing you to do more. And Harriet just described that concert where you were able to do things where you broke down, we talked about snackable content before, but breaking that down into bundles. And if those bundles are uber personalized, and then you can use your machine learning to find out other audience members or other audience profiles that would want those same bundles, then the audience becomes bigger. And when you become part of something bigger, it's your personal experience, but it's within something that's happening much bigger. At the end of a concert, the band play their last number and the crowd sing it. It's like 20,000 versions of the same tune, but they love that, and that's a shared experience, and that's what we're actually trying to get. So the more that we duet product and purpose, I think the more you're going to have immersive or engaging memories that can be taken away.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's to do with that physicality of the event, as well as what the takeaways are as well. It's the emotional impact of technology as well as the impact of that virtuosity. And how do you think that, Frankie, if I come to you on this, the psychology of that event design, how does that play in those new fields of how you get an audience to leave the event humming the last tune?
Humming the last tune. I think
It's more champagne coming.
more champagne.
More champagne.
Give more champagne.
And really good lights.
Yeah, loads of lights, champagne, jobs are good in. I think it's getting that, like you say, that real balance between hardware, software, and being at an event. Hardware is very cold and alien, but actually, if it's done in like the way of like steps, and you're seeing your input, your reaction, your reflection in hardware and software, then suddenly you become far more engaged with that experience. So, if you light up all the different senses, and you're more likely going to remember that event if your smell has, you know, synced in, be like, oh wow, this smells great and this feels great and oh my God, this looks great. You know, you've suddenly got all this activation happening, and that is going to like make that event far more memorable. And if technology can help that and make them feel engaged rather than disengaged, because that's the fear, like I think with Google Glass, it was a bit of a disengage because it was just too far ahead. It was a bit like, oh, well, this is cool, but we don't really have any object relationship to it because it's too many steps. I think to make technology connecting, you need to make the user understand why it's happening and what that connection is. Don't make them feel stupid. As soon as you make someone feel stupid, they're going to feel disconnected from it. So therefore, gosh, we're far more connecting that way.
No, that's very good. And it's kind of the data that you take out of an event.
Yeah.
And how you manage that coalescence of data will lead you down the road of how you define the next one. And I suppose going back to the machine learning elements it's going to be unavoidable for us to take on the ability to utilize machine learning, social networks, etc., in order to design the next series of events that's going to work to enable us to get the ROI out.
Yeah, I think people are very savvy to not being used. I think especially in today when you click onto anything and they say, oh, cookies, you know, and everyone feels very like, oh no, I don't want people to track everything of me. So the fact that you're having this connection to it, they also don't want to feel cheated to be like, hang on, have I just been some sort of like subject to you and you're just now going to learn from me, and then the next event you've now learned this and this and this. Actually, you'll almost freak people out if it's almost too like, oh, you like pink champagne. Let's go back to oh, you like this. Oh, actually, you prefer this type of seat. And you're like, oh, this actually is creeping me out because you have like taken all this data and taken all of this and you're now produced, you know. So we have to be careful to treat people to feel connected and valued, but not make them feel sort of used and abused and sort of, yeah.
Yeah, they tend to go in tribes. You visit an experience in a tribe with a group of people, and we do so much in society through little tribes and so forth. And so if you allow people to express themselves and control the content, as Harriet said, control the content within their tribe, they do things together. And that user-generated content makes the event amazing, and it builds the experience. So the more we give them, the more they will do, and the more they will love us for letting them do that.
Very good. I'm going to throw to a question now, which I thought was quite good, as we're heading towards our last couple of minutes. Will sustainable, and it's a bit UK-centric, Harriet, I do apologise, but will sustainable virtual events make us all culturally more insular? Brackets, I don't just mean Brexit, brackets. Do you think that's going to make us more culturally insular because we'll have our own echo chamber of the virtual events we subscribe to? We don't go out and mingle with people?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's what we've seen is that events are now less restricted by a geo because of their virtual nature. So events that previously would only have maybe had a couple of hundred people in a hotel room or wherever gathered now have thrown that event online to that 200 people, and lo and behold, another 1,000 people have joined them, and those 1,000 people wouldn't have joined in the venue because of travel and the logistics involved. So I think potentially we are opening ourselves up to a much wider global audience with virtual, rather than restricting ourselves to a more insular view on things. I think, you know, travel broadens the mind, and I think, you know, if travel is restricted, then obviously that's going to, you know, have an impact. But I think people are now consuming ideas and concepts and views from different parts of the world much more than they used to when it was just relying on the physical.
Yeah, I'd agree. Rob, do you think there's a danger of being culturally insular?
I'm totally with Chris. I think that we've now made the events internet. There's more than ever. And there's no excuse for doing absolutely everything because we can do everything. You know, a company used to employ the best person X within 30 miles. Now they can simply employ the best person. And you used to go to an event because it was within your geographic jurisdiction. Now you can go anywhere, at any time of the night, in any place. So I think that it's just got so much bigger, and I don't think it'll ever get smaller again.
What a way to finish.
Exactly. I think that's very well done, Frankie. That's taken us right to our hour. So I think that's brilliant. I think it's a great way to finish, a very positive way to finish, which thank you very much for everybody. Our hour is up. So I'd like to thank our speakers, Chris Doggart, Rob Dunsmore, Frankie Boyle. I wish them all the best over the next few months. And I'm very much look forward to grabbing a pint with them in a pub in the not too distant future. Of course, to Harriet for joining us from Dubai. Great to hear from the office over there and to take the time. We'd like to thank Grace. She's our fabulous nurse who's been delivering tests for us here over the past couple of days to enable us to do this broadcast securely. I'd like to thank Noble Wi-Fi for the guys here. They're our connectivity partner at the Saatchi, enabling us to deliver a rock-steady stream out to the great wide world. And lastly, but by no means least, I need to thank the Saatchi Gallery, our venue partner. It's a fabulous space, and we're really very grateful to be able to bring you this broadcast from the studio here. Keep safe. Keep a beady eye on June the 21st. I look forward to seeing and speaking to you soon. Goodbye.